Hi, I'm Patrick Kelly. Today I'm going to talk about Wayne Jackson's epic journey to the 1973 NCAA championships. Before I introduce you to Wayne and a special guest, I want to set the stage and tell you why the 1972-73 season was really a watershed time period in the history of the Kansas State University wrestling program. First, the economy. The economy wasn't going well nationally. A recession was looming, and at K-State, the football program was struggling. And what that meant then, as it does today, the football program brings in the majority of the funds to an athletic program at a major institution. And what this meant is there wasn't enough funds to go around to help support the other programs. So there was belt tightening and penny pinching just to survive. In June of 1972, Title IX passed, and the ramifications from it really didn't start happening until a few years later. But universities and athletic departments had to start figuring out what it was going to do to their budgets to comply with this new law. Fritz Knorr's association with Kansas State University began in the late 20s when he entered as an undergrad. After graduation, he spent about a decade teaching and coaching at the middle school, high school, and junior college level before coming back to K-State University to become the business manager. He also had the title of assistant athletic director. He was a head coach for basketball for a time. He was a head coach for baseball. And starting in 1953, he began a 19-year tenure as head wrestling coach. In September of 1972, Fritz suddenly and unexpectedly died of a heart attack. Dale Samuelson was his grad assistant. He had spent 2 years out of high school at Colby Community College, where he was an All-American. He came to K-State to finish up. He was a national qualifier in 1972, and that's when he graduated with his undergrad. Well, before he started coaching and teaching at the high school level, he wanted to get an advanced degree, so Fritz took him on as a grad assistant. When Fritz passed away, it was only weeks before the season was to begin, so the athletic department made the decision to put the whistle around Dale Samuelson's neck, and instantly, as a 22-year-old, he became a head coach of a D1 wrestling program. With just weeks before the start of the season, they really didn't have any other options, but Dale did what he could, made it through the season. End of the season, the Big 8 tournament was hosted at University of Missouri in Columbia. We had 3 national qualifiers. By virtue of placing in the top 4 at the Big 8 tournament, you automatically qualified for the NCAAs at that time. Roger Fisher placed 4th at 118 pounds. Wayne Jackson was 3rd at 134 pounds. And Gary Walter was 4th at 190 pounds. The team comes back to Manhattan and excited about the upcoming national tournament, but they were informed that they will not be going to the national tournament because the university wasn't funding the trip. Obviously, this didn't sit well with any of them. They demanded a meeting with the athletic administration, and that was denied. They said it's a final decision. There's no wiggle room. You're not going. So eventually, they kind of accepted it, all but the 134-pounder Wayne Jackson. He decided the cheapest and easiest thing to do would be to hitchhike to nationals. And he tried to convince the other 2 to come with him, but safety concerns and just didn't think it would be a good idea to travel that far, because nationals were in Seattle, Washington, 1,800 miles from Manhattan, Kansas. In Wayne's previous experience hitchhiking, he grew up in Ark City, and he hitchhiked maybe a time or 2 to Newkirk, Oklahoma, which is about 20 miles away. So with that kind of experience, Wayne was let off on the outskirts of Manhattan, and away he went. And I'll let him fill you in on his journey to Seattle. But when I was recording this story from Wayne, sitting down and recording it with him, a couple times he brought up a young assistant coach at the University of Washington that was particularly helpful to him. Provided a place for him to stay, food, let him work out with the team, even cornered him during his matches at the Nationals. He couldn't remember the coach's name. He thought it had a hyphen in it. It sounded kind of like Wantano. Just didn't know what it was. So that day on my drive back to Topeka, I just got thinking that if that young assistant coach is still out there, I've got to find him. I've got to find him so that Wayne can reconnect with him and thank him for what he did all those years ago. So I began internet search. I contacted some of my wrestling contacts that might know of people from that era that could maybe help me. I called out to the University of Washington, the library, the archives. They helped as much as they could. I contacted the Sports Information Director's office at the University of Washington, and Mike Bruskus was particularly helpful with me. He found an old program from a dual meet that listed the staff and the athletes, and then I followed up with some articles that kind of confirmed that Mike D'Antuono was this young assistant coach that Wayne was talking about. So with that, I continued my search and worked hard on it, and then I would let it go for a while and then get back to it. And I just felt like I couldn't let it go. I had to find this, and I found a break. There was a blog post of all things about food, Coaching for Pizza it was called, I believe, and with some coaches get together and they hash old memories, and they have food along with it. And Mike was featured in one of the blog posts, in his picture with him and his wife. So from there, I found that he was living in Southern California. I found an email address, and lo and behold, it was a good email address. He responded back to me, and we began a correspondence by phone and email. So separately, I asked both of them if they would be interested in doing some kind of a video conference to reconnect after all those years, and they're both excited to do it. So I contacted Collie County Community College, and Rhoda McLaughlin was nice enough to set us up with a room in the library, and so that's where we set this up. And what you're about to see is a meeting between Mike D'Antuono and Wayne Jackson for the first time in 51 years. Enjoy. Today I'm at Ark City on the campus of Collie County Community College, where I'm facilitating a meeting between Wayne Jackson and Mike D'Antuono. For the first time since 1973, Jackson and D'Antuono are meeting up via Microsoft Teams for a refreshing of their chance meeting in the 1973 NCAA tournament. So without any further ado, I'll switch the camera over here to Wayne and just start with some questions, and we'll let it go where it goes. All right, Mike, meet Wayne.
Yes, sir.
Hello, Mike.
Hello, Wayne. Jeez.
been a while.
Only 50 years, huh?
Yeah.
I'll be right back. Yeah,
if your hair wasn't gray, you'd look the same, I think. Yeah. He said that you downplayed your role when I hitchhiked to Washington that time. I said, dang, if it wasn't for that guy, I wouldn't have had a place to stay. And it was your way I remember it was your fraternity house where I stayed.
Yep, I got a hold of the fraternity house, and we had a whole lot of wrestlers in the house at the time, but a lot of other athletes, and it was a very large house.
I think you also was the guy that told the television, that got me on TV and told the newspaper and got me on the AP, and you got me famous. Only bad thing is if that was great having all that publicity, but then I got beat out. That was a bad
No,
part.
hey, you did better in your NC2As than I did. You won too, Hey, 2 for 2, 2 out of 4. That's 500 in anybody's league. That's good.
Yeah, well.
So first, Mike, please introduce yourself to the primarily Kansas audience and give us a recap of your wrestling background, your time as an assistant at the University of Washington, and a little bit about your career after college.
I'll try and go. Wayne, good meeting you after 50 years.
Yeah,
too
good,
long,
good.
but
Yeah, that's same here.
Well, I'm from Tacoma, Washington, which is a city outside of Seattle, about 30 miles. And in the 60s, 1966, 65, 66, I was a 120-pound wrestler in Tacoma, Washington. Luckily, or just because there wasn't enough people that were good enough to compete against me, I won 2 city championships and 2 regional championships, and went on to the state championships in Washington. Senior year, I was undefeated, wound up going to the state championships again. And as things would have it, unbeknownst to me, there were two wrestlers west of the mountains in Washington who we didn't know or any heard of. But it was the two twin brothers, the Kellers, out of Washington, Dwayne and Daryl Keller, and might have had an undefeated season, but wound up in the finals, wrestling against Daryl Keller, who wound up being a national champion at Oklahoma State many years later. And then in the state freestyles, undefeated again, wound up wrestling his brother, Dwayne Keller, and he beat me. So my life being that I got to wrestle two NCAA champions in my high school, and the only thing that marred my record was those two brothers, both of them NC2A champions. Wound up getting recruited at Oregon and Washington, and which was well known at that time, both of the schools, but Washington had been in the doldrums for a couple of years, and they hired a brand new coach, Jim Smith, and I was his first recruit. Maybe he didn't have anybody else to draw from, but I wound up as his first recruit on the team for 1966, and the goal was to try and become a national power. He succeeded. Not saying I did, but he succeeded, and within 3 years, we were a national power. I wrestled 3 years at Washington, but during that period of time, we wound up getting some heavy recruits that wanted to make a name for themselves at Washington and start a program off. And we wound up with, within 3 to 4 years, 2 national champions, one being Larry Owings, who came there, who wound up wrestling both the Keller brothers in the NC2A. So that's sort of my pathway to history at having Larry and the Keller brothers, both programs being prolific. And by 1973, we had been nationally ranked in the top 5, and we wound up being awarded the NC2A championship at University of Washington, which brings us to Wayne, who brought us together at that time. But we had 10 great years at Washington with over a dozen All-Americans, and I stayed there for 3 years as assistant coach and went on to coach high school for 3 years, teach and coach, and things led to another, and I wound up getting a job with a trade association in Washington, D.C. in 1975, just for the summer as an intern, and never went back to teaching, and wound up traveling the world for a major corporation, engineering and construction, and wound up doing labor negotiations, and wound up through Alaska, throughout the United States, transferred to the world headquarters in 75 in Pasadena, and spent 35 years doing labor negotiations for a major corporation in the United States. But started off as just a 120-pound wrestler in the state of Washington.
Wow, Mike, that's a fascinating story. Thanks for that. So with the state record 13, again, state record 13 state titles in Arc City, and awards too numerous to mention, Coach Jackson really does need no introduction, especially to our Kansas audience. But Coach, let us know what you've been doing in retirement.
Since I retired, I've been I always wanted to be a farmer and a rancher, and I'm kind of a play farmer and a play rancher. I got a small farm and a small herd of cattle and a small herd of goats and a horse, and I just I like to piddle around with my cows, and I cut firewood in the winter to try to stay in shape, and that's what I've been doing. I'm still in Arkansas City, Arkansas City. So
Okay,
that's about it.
and I understand that both of you are still interested in the wrestling world. I know, Wayne, you've gone to NCAA championships and are still keep an eye on the Oklahoma State program and that sort of thing. Is that the case for you as well, Mike? Do you still keep an eye on the wrestling world?
As much as they can, only because it's those wrestlers are a real close-knit fraternity for some reason. I guess it's the years are persevering, anytime you see anybody with some callous years, you go, you're a wrestler, and it's sort of a bond that we have over there. But Washington, didn't continue the program. But all of us who graduated, and we've had reunions over the past years. And then just recently, our Coach Smith, who was about 85, got inducted into the University of Washington Hall of Fame. And a whole group of us, over a dozen, showed up at his inauguration. And I got to put the purple jacket on my coach up on stage for his years of bringing Washington to prominence. So it was an exciting time and fun to see old white-haired old wrestlers get together, still thinking they can grapple with each other.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. Well, kudos to you guys for whoever, put that nomination together, and kudos for the University of Washington for their willingness to recognize a sport that no longer exists. So that's pretty cool. So I'm beyond excited about this opportunity to get you two reacquainted and kind of rehash the interesting events of the history of the Kansas State wrestling program. And not only the story of Coach Jackson's journey to the 73 Nationals, it's compelling on its own, but to tell the story of the university in desperate financial trouble that was doing what it could to keep its head above water. First, Wayne, give us a brief recap of the decision to hitchhike 1,800 miles to Seattle, Washington, and a little about the journey itself to the point of arriving on the UW campus. So just
Well, they told us that they weren't going to send us to nationals. They weren't going to pay our way. So I said, well, heck, I'm going to go anyway. And I always thought it'd be an adventure to hitchhike anyway. So I hitchhiked, and it was an adventure. I got some rides with some some dandies. When he let me off outside Manhattan, I just almost got on the other side of the road and came back, because I waited there for hours. It seemed like 2 or 3 hours. And then when finally a farmer picked me up, and he had an old rickety pickup, and it with stock racks on it, and he took me about a mile down the road and let me out again. And a bunch of dogs came out from a house and attacked me. And I thought, damn, I'm making a mistake here. And anyway, pretty quick, a guy picked me up in a truck, in a bobtail truck, and he took me to Omaha or Lincoln, Nebraska. It took me to I-80. I got on I-80, and it was smooth sailing for us getting a ride after that. But I got in with I got in with some people. I got in with 2 guys that had just got out of prison in Tennessee. And that was quite rough. They took me all the way from Brigham City, Utah to Portland, Oregon. And I got in with another guy. And as soon as I got in with him, this was in Wyoming somewhere. I got in with this guy named Howard Tickle, and he was a guy that drove cars. He drove new cars to different dealerships and stuff. And so he took me quite a ways. But when they first picked me up, a police highway patrol got us, gave us both a ticket, gave him a ticket for stopping on the interstate, gave me a ticket for pedestrian on the interstate. And I kept that ticket for a long time. I was looking for it to show Patrick. I couldn't find it with all my junk, but anyway, I apologizing like crazy when I got it. Sorry you got picked up. Sorry about this. And he said, I wasn't worried about that. He said, I was worried about this. He pulled his jacket open. He had a big old bottle of whiskey. and he took a swig, and then we went for about 100 or so miles, and he had to stop at the liquor store and get him another big old bottle. But I mean, he drove straight, but I was a little bit nervous. And those ex-cons made me a little bit nervous too. But anyway, a guy, Portland, Oregon, it seemed like we got there, like those guys drove all night from Brigham City to Portland, it seemed like. And this guy picked me up at Portland and took me, and we went over a bridge there, and he said, there's Washington. And I walked over to Washington, and when I come in there, I seen you and your team were having practice. I got there like 2 days early. I thought it would take longer to get there. And so I took off like 3 or 4 days early, and I got there. I got there in 2 days, and it's 2,000 miles.
Wow,
That's amazing.
Just an incredible story. So now, Mike, pick it up here. What do you recall? And I know it's been 50 years, but what do you recall about the meeting of Wayne for the first time and learning of the story to get him to that point at the national tournament?
Well, we had a unbelievable large, for us at the time, wrestling room, and it was modern at the time, brand new, it was huge, second floor. And I also, because this was the first time that we were holding a national tournament, I was doing promotions besides assistant coaching is a little different, because when you had Larry Owens and guys like that on the team, you really weren't coaching them that much. But I was assistant coach. I was also chief cook and bottle washer for publicity, getting everybody in and out of the tournament, press and everything. And before you know it, this vagabond walked into the wrestling room, a little haggard. I had no idea who he was, because obviously we were in training for that. But, I went over and said hello to the guy, and in a brief time, he told me where he was from. And I actually really couldn't believe it. He said, well, where's the rest of your team? And I'm in. I brought Coach Smith over and said, we got something strange here, Coach. And Coach is a little guy. He was only 5'3", and he just loved people and everything, and just said, well, what can we do for him? I said, I think we do just about anything. He's got nothing. Brought him over and introduced him, and found out that obviously he didn't have a place to stay. Obviously, I'm not sure, don't remember much what we were asking him about eating or anything, but he looked a little haggard considering he was going to compete in 2 to 3 days. I had a fraternity on campus that I'd lived with 3 years earlier when I was a student. Got a hold of Sigma Nu fraternity and said, hey, and we had a lot of wrestlers in the house. It was pretty easy, and but it's a large house at Washington. And I said, hey, when you guys put him up over there, we've got there's over 100 members in the house, so it was a large and a big sleeping room and everything. And that way he got 3 square meals a day of what he needed between making weight and everything. And so we got him over to the fraternity house and got him settled in. And Coach Smith said, hey, you can work out and train with us. And he became our mascot.
Well, and Mike, I find this really, really ironic that University of Washington qualified a wrestler in each of the 10 weight classes except 134, and that's
didn't have anybody.
That was Wayne's weight class.
I know.
And I don't know if this played into it, but what do you recall about the way that the team rallied around him and took care of his needs during before and during the tournament?
Like I said, he became our mascot. It was just as easy as that. The wrestling community is really small and tight. It's just obviously, since we didn't have anybody competing against him, Pac-8 at that time, Oregon State had the better wrestlers than we did at that time. But we just made him part of the team, and and it was very easy because we didn't have to worry about, when the tournament started, that he'd be competing against our guys. So I know myself and one of the other assistant coaches were on his sidelines over there when he finally came out. So, I mean, it just sort of played right into it,
Yeah. And now do you remember the nickname that was given to him? And do you remember how that nickname came about?
I do not know how it came about, except that the press picked it up. We knew Bruce King was a longtime reporter for UW Sports for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and I think it was Cairo Radio or TV, whatever. But he was, it was big at that time at Washington. We were drawing 6,000 to 7,000 for the meet. And we got a hold of Bruce King, and we introduced him to him when he was going to one of our practice deals. And before you know it, he had an article in the paper over there. And Bruce was pretty good about picking up interesting tidbits that could be used. And it just took off from there.
Yeah, and the nickname was Kansas Flash. Do you remember who came up with that nickname?
I really wish I could. Wayne?
It's probably that paper guy that you're talking about. I remember they wrote it in one of those papers, and I came back to K-State and they were calling me the Kansas Flash.
So, like I said, go with the legend.
Yeah.
So Wayne, from your perspective, you were coming into a situation not knowing what to expect. For all you knew, you would have to fend for yourself and live on the streets while you were at nationals. What did the support you received from the University of Washington wrestling team mean to you at the time, and from the perspective now of over 50 years later?
Well, it was a little tense hitchhiking all, some of those rides I got. But once I got in there and I met Mike and that team, I was just like I was at K-State Wrestling Room almost. I mean, like he was saying, the wrestlers, they're kind of all family or something. You see wrestlers 50 years later and you can talk to them. And anyway, I felt real comfortable. Old Mike especially was just taking care of me, getting me a place to stay, and I started wrestling with some of them kids working out. And there was a guy from Blackwell, Oklahoma. He said, "You're from Kansas, huh? Where are you from?" I said, Arkansas City, because people don't, they don't know what Arkansas City, and he said, Arkansas City? He said, "I'm from Blackwell," and Blackwell's only 25 miles away from here. And he was the heavyweight for Washington. His name was David Graves.
Dave Graves, yes.
I think Ed Graves, Dave Graves.
Dave Graves.
David Graves, that's what I thought. So, I mean, right off, I felt good. I got there. I was getting down to weight. I was getting ready to wrestle. I felt fine once I found these guys. So, and this here don't have nothing to do with your question you just asked, but Mike, talking about them Keller brothers, when I was going to hitchhike back to Ark City. It was spring break and there wasn't school at K-State. So I was going to hitchhike back, and I had like rich people calling me up wanting to pay my way. And I said, I now need to pay my way. I was just going to hitchhike. But then it was them Kellers, and I can't remember I think it was Daryl, not Dwayne, but him and Dennis Crow, who used to wrestle at O State, and this guy named Larry Wilkie. I rode home with them guys back to Ark City because they had to go to Stillwater, which is just 60 miles south of here, and they had to come through Ark City. So I rode all the way back with old Keller, your old guy, Daryl Keller. I think it was Daryl.
It's a small world.
Crazy. Those guys are funny, but that's who I come back with.
For sure. So, Mike, you know what? I've been in Kansas now 20 years or so, and the story of Wayne hitchhiking to nationals kind of precedes him. Before I even knew who he was, there's a story about this, interesting part of Kansas State wrestling history where this guy hitchhiked. So that's kind of what I knew about it. Does this story ever get brought up when you're talking with your alums, like a get together, gatherings, that kind of thing? Has this ever come up through the years?
Not through the years, but like I said, when we had our reunion, obviously the NC2A championship at Washington was a big event, and we all remembered it and said, "Remember that guy?" Anybody? And that was before you guys had gotten in touch with me. Remember that guy in Kansas? You came in, everybody scratching their head, go, "Yeah, whatever happened to that guy?" And that was last November, and goodness knows, right after the first of the year, that's when you guys got a hold of me, and I went, "Holy, this is unbelievable! You know, this is a small world."
Oh my God. Well, that's great. That is great. So, Mike, even though it's not related to this story at all, I've got to bring it up. So you were at University of Washington. You already mentioned when Larry Owens was going through there. Owens, of course, is the wrestler that defeated Dan Gable in the 1970 NCAA finals at Northwestern University. I understand that you've also had occasion to kind of reconnect with him over the years. What was he like as a competitor, and describe his mentality in just selling out on his vision quest to dethrone the king?
Well, he was from a small school out of Oregon, Granby High, if I'm not mistaken. But obviously, he was fabulous in high school, and he wound up coming to Washington rather than Oregon State, or Portland State. And part of it was building, hopefully, a new tradition and a team. And he came in, and like I said before, at that time, I realized my career was just about over when I saw the new wave of people that were being recruited. So that was my third year, my junior year. And he was just a different caliber of competitor that we had ever seen. And we brought in the national high school champ from Japan, Hajime Shinjo, and they were one weight apart. The two of them, he was a three-time All-American, and then Larry went on, to his sophomore year. He changed weights. He knew what he wanted to do. He actually wanted to come down to the weight to be able to compete against Gable, unheard of at the time, but just so directed in his competition, and just things that you'd never seen before, at least in our sport up in Washington. But it's that type of person that knows what his goals are, and he was going to do it. And at that time, our wrestling program took off because he just brought a whole new direction into Washington in competition and national publicity.
Absolutely fascinating story. Thank you for that. So, Wayne, the story of your journey to the 73 NCAAs is part of K-State and really the state of Kansas. As I was saying, that, me being new to the state at the time, I kind of heard this story. So it's one of those stories that gets circulated quite often in Kansas wrestling lore. What are your lasting memories and impressions from that event that happened over 50 years ago?
Yeah, it was a neat experience. I'm glad I did it. Like I was saying, it was good to go to a place and feel that welcome, just because it was a wrestling room, and guys like Mike in there, and old David Graves and stuff. And it was real good. And I mean, the publicity was okay if I would have won or even placed, but getting beat out, I never did like it. I had how'd you do? Well, I got beat out. That ain't no good. So that was
a lot
the
of
worst
people
part.
Showed up that didn't. You came in and won matches.
Geez, why'd you go hitchhike all down there and you got beat? You should have stayed home. That's what I'm thinking. But I'm glad I went anyway. So it was fun, and it was an adventure. And well, like I was telling Patrick, I can't remember sometimes what I was doing yesterday, but I can remember all the details back then.
Yeah, I just, so what you're saying, Wayne, is that they made a movie out of it. They'd have to change it to you winning the national title then, huh?
Yeah, don't make a movie of it. Right? Yeah.
But I just find it, the piece to it, to me, that is really most compelling is that it was just a genuine, organic reflex to you, that you weren't trying to do it to save the K-State program or to make a political statement or try to bring, least of all, to bring attention to you, but you just wanted to wrestle in nationals, and you were going to do whatever it took to do it. That's the part of it that is really most compelling to me. So,
well, that's how it was. I wasn't trying to, I still like K-State. I don't like that they dropped wrestling all those years ago and haven't started it back. And I wasn't trying to make a statement. I wasn't trying to make anybody look bad. Yeah, I just wanted to wrestle, and I did, and it wasn't that bad, that hitchhiking that far and getting there. I mean, it was okay. I'm glad I did it, but
that's what individual sports are like. You know, you're goal oriented, and not, it's easy to say now, it's not so much winning, you know, it's that old thing it's the journey. And once you put in all that effort, just, there are a lot of people who showed up at, you know, an NC2A, you know, I never won an NC2A tournament match, you know, but the years of experience and just being in there and involved, and the camaraderie that comes with it, you know, you're playing it down. You won 2 matches in a 4-day tournament in the NC2A. There's a lot of people who didn't do things like that. And then when you lose, you got to come back and you got to wrestle again in the when you drop down into the tournament. You know, that's tough. And then you wound up winning there. You know, so you play it down. But we know, as a wrestling, or you know, any other individual sports, you're out there alone and you're just doing it because you enjoy it. You know, it's just it's the competition.
yep, that's right.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for taking the time and your willingness to get together on this unique and compelling event in Kansas State wrestling history, really the state of Kansas wrestling history. And also I want to thank Collie County for opening their doors to allow us to film here. So I appreciate it, guys.
I want to thank both of you. And after 50 years, I'm glad to meet Wayne again. You're looking good.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Old Patrick wanted to do this. I mean, I couldn't imagine talking to you again after all these years, but thanks for your help all them years ago. And it was sure nice seeing you again, talking with you.
I really appreciate it. It's good seeing you, and glad we all got together.
Yeah, great.
So Mike.